Hey everyone, and welcome back to Timeless. Today we are going to be going over the biggest impact set for Timeless since Modern Horizons 3 dropped about a year ago. Of course, everybody's talking about these lands, big three, colorless lands that are going to shake up the format, and yes, we've gotten confirmation that Strip Mine will be unrestricted in the format. Before we talk about this, I want to kind of frame an argument about like how mana is in Timeless right now and talk about exactly why people like me are happy that there's going to be a shakeup. Because mana in Timeless is very good and it's pretty free. So, for example, at the bottom of the screen, I have a sequence that the best deck Omnitel can do every single game. Every single day, every single game, they can fetch an untapped colored source to do something like an Inquisition on turn 1. On turn 2, they can cast a double pip card. That card doesn't have to have a black pip. It could be double blue pips. It could be green black pip. It does not matter. Turn 3, they can cast Rakshasha's Bargain. Even without the extra mana from Mana Drain, they can just fetch out that third color of mana. And on turn 4, it's possible for them to have Mystic Sanctuary up, which is a pretty ridiculous mana curve out, especially considering the fact that in their mana base, they play Mistrise Village to get their spells uncounterable when the game goes long, and four MDFC's copies of Waterlogged Teachings, their actual land count's only like 20. And the Waterlogged Teachings tutor for their win condition at instant speed. Mana in the top decks is incredibly good. It's incredibly free to splash a third color. And even when you splash a third color, you get upside like Mystic Sanctuary or MDFCs or utility lands for 100% free. And I know I'm exaggerating a little bit. You're not going to have Mystic Sanctuary on 4 every single time when you are playing the MDFC lands. I get that. They're not always casting a 1-drop. Frequently, they're surveilling. And the thing is, with surveil lands in the format, if you ever do take a turn off, for example, if Omnitel doesn't have turn 1 interaction, they're just going to fetch a surveil on turn 2, or on turn 1, to set themselves up even better. Surveils are 2-colored, which means if they fetch, for example, a blue-black surveil, they are once again holding themselves open to either hold up Mana Drain or cast Assemble the Team on their next turn. So it's really free. The other top deck of the format is Energy, which I have the Energy trifecta, nope, on that side, right next to me. Energy casts all 3 of those cards on turn 1 very consistently, and they really don't have trouble doing it ever. And then on turn 2, they can have white available for Guide plus Pride Together, or white-black available for Peddler, and it's really only a minor amount of thinking to like play around all of those possibilities and get your right colors, right? If you go Godless Shrine into Sacred Foundry or vice versa, you can cast every single card in your deck and every single double spell in your deck pretty much that you can practically hit against, right? So mana is too free, and there's almost no reason to run a 2-color deck because even in these 3-color decks, you still get the utility lands really frequently. So it's been kind of constraining on the format. There's no reason to change the Omnitel build from, say, Sultai to just blue-green or blue-black because you're losing so much, and there's so little cost to building the deck as it is. So let's talk about these guys. These colorless lands that are going to hugely shake up the format. One of these is not like the others. Eldrazi Tempo is not going to be as big impact, but the other 2 can theoretically go in any deck. You could Strip Mine in any deck. Ancient Tomb is great in almost any deck. We have the confirmation that all of them are going to be unrestricted, and it is going to give you a very good reason to not build a 3-colored deck. It's going to give you a reason to build a 1-color deck if you can squeeze all of these in, for example, building an Eldrazi deck, which we're going to talk about next. So I'm really excited. The format is getting a proper shakeup. Decks like Mardu Energy or Esper Psychic Frog or something like Show and Tell that have been able to have those really greedy 3-color mana bases essentially for free are going to be under a lot of pressure, both offensive pressure from Strip Mine and the opportunity cost of not playing Ancient Tomb in your deck. If you're playing a Show and Tell deck without Ancient Tomb, it might end up just being worse off than playing one with Ancient Tomb. So it's going to cause some amount of a shakeup in the meta. And can Mardu Energy keep up with a fair deck that has Ancient Tomb in it? I don't know. We could, of course, just be overreacting a little bit, and what actually happens in the meta is Mardu Energy just plays 4 Strip Mines and nothing ever happens, like I like to say. But there's a very real possibility that the meta gets shaken up significantly. So let's talk about like some actual potential uses for these cards, because I know some people are going to want to see deck lists. I don't have finished deck lists, of course. Spoiler season actually technically isn't over. I thought it was going to end today, which is why I like made the PowerPoint yesterday and finished it this morning so I could do the video today. But it was just the bonus sheet that ended today. There's actually 2 more days of spoilers, but like we've gotten 95% of the timeless playable cards. I think we can go through the set today. The first obvious way to put together all these new lands is into a prison deck, and you can also do Eldrazi Prison, which we're going to talk about first. You can leverage all of these lands that I have at the bottom. Look at those 5 lands. Ancient Tomb, Eldrazi Tempo, Ugin's Labyrinth, so that's 12 soul lands, plus Cavern of Souls, plus 4 Strip Mines. That's 20 of your 23, 24 lands that you're going to play in the deck. Just fill out the rest with basic forest and waste, and you have pretty much a perfect mana base, as good of a mana base as you can ask for in an Eldrazi deck. The only thing that you could ask for is a couple of copies of Wasteland to be the cherry on top. The deck is going to be mean. We have very aggressively statted threats like Thought-Knot Seer, things like Sowing Micah Spawn with cast triggers. There are ways to really beat your opponent dead quickly when you have this mana acceleration. And I also want to point out those cards at the top right. Those are cards that don't have to go into Eldrazi Prison deck. They could go into, for example, a mono-red Prison deck that plays all of these soul lands. I think that cards like Disruptor Flute are going to be potentially main deckable. It depends on how the format shakes out, of course, but if we end up in a really fast mana combo heavy format, Disruptor Flute, Thorn of Amethyst, and Chalice are going to be main deckable cards. Chalice on 1 is very good into current Timeless. I cannot guarantee you it will continue to be good. Like I literally just said that like Mardu Energy Psychic Frog decks might just like fall off a cliff in terms of their ability to like compete and play Magic, right? So Chalice on 1 might not be as good in the future as it is now, but in current Timeless, Chalice on 1 off of an Ancient Tomb would be killer. And those 2 mana cards are pretty much 1 mana cards if you're playing enough soul lands. And Disruptor Flute is just a crazy underrated card in my opinion. Like, well, Timeless players play it, so they rate it well, but being able to play that card with fast mana and throw it out as early as turn 1, naming not just your opponent's like critical combo pieces, but even naming something as innocuous as like their Brainstorm or a small card that they use to assemble everything, could be a really huge play if you know what you're doing and you know what you're playing against, or naming your opponent's sideboard cards. Oof. There's more than one way to do Ancient Tomb, of course. You can do mono white Ancient Tomb. This is really similar to what people do in Legacy right now. If you look up like Legacy mono white lists, you can do Imprint to Chrome Mox, Ancient Tomb, turn 1 Archon of Emeria. That's a fantastic start. Turn 2, play any land drop. That land could be a Strip Mine. Oh, and then play a One Ring. Going turn 1 Archon into turn 2 One Ring beats most decks in the format. You're going to draw some amount of follow-up and smother your opponent card advantage. You're forcing them to play at your speed, only playing 1 spell per turn, or forcing them to have an answer, but even if they did have the answer for the turn 1 Archon, you got a turn 2 Ring, which resolved because your opponent spent their mana answering the Archon instead of holding up a counterspell for the Ring. This is a strong start, and you can just imagine a bunch of other cards to throw on top of this. Anointed Peacekeeper, Solitude, maybe even Guide Pride, and build a mono-white deck. These decks would tend to be monocolor though, or perhaps you could squeeze in 2 colors. The thing is, if you're running Ancient Tomb plus Strip Mine, that is 8 dead lands. Frank Karsten math suggests that you should have 14 colors for each, like 14 of each colored source to actually have it available on turn 1, right? So if you're running 22 lands in your deck, minus 8 for the 8 colorless lands, I could see the exactly 14. So it would be a really tight squeeze to run anything more than 2 colors, pretty much impossible to run more than 2 colors. You could get away with 2 if you had something like Chrome Mox supplementing your ability to make colored mana, but realistically, a lot of these decks are going to want to be a 1 color and perhaps even leverage just a few more colorless lands or leverage a lot of basics, considering that we could be going into a Blood Moon plus Maggus of the Moon card that we haven't mentioned yet format, where mana is going to be under a lot of pressure. Another thing I mentioned earlier that I will say explicitly is that the top decks are going to have to rebuild, and one of them is going to be Show and Tell. Show and Tell can use Ancient Tomb, but as soon as you start putting Ancient Tomb into your deck, cards like Mana Drain and Assemble the Team become sort of off the table. You can't cast those cards at all using your Ancient Tomb mana, so you can essentially view those as 3 mana cards because you're wasting a land if you are spending your turn holding up Mana Drain, right? And this is another reason why I'm excited for Ancient Tomb, because blue decks, the status quo for blue decks has been to play a Mystic Sanctuary, Mana Drain, Treasure Cruise, Brainstorm pile, right? All these heavy blue pips, you put Commandeer in your sideboard too, right? And getting this really powerful colorless land is another thing to incentivize people to do something different. It's going to cause a shakeup in deck building. We'll see which is better. Or like the Omnitel. Is it better to play the current build, which we're going to call traditional, or is it better to play the stock up Ancient Tomb Turbo version. I honestly can't tell you right now, so we're going to have to spend a lot of time play testing it. It's going to be fun. All right, it's possible nothing ever happens. This is from Riley. He just thought up Strip Mine Energy. That Ghost Quarter is, of course, supposed to be Strip Mine. You play White Orchid Phantom in your sideboard, and there you go. You have a very toxic version of the current toxic deck, right? It's very possible that nothing ever happens, and a deck like this could tear up the format with 4 Strip Mines. People haven't been able to play 4 Strip Mine in Constructed since, like, the 90s, quite literally. 20 years or more. So I don't know how 4 Strip Mine is going to play out in Constructed. Like, I really couldn't tell you. So we will just see whether or not something similar to what we have right now is the best thing to do, or if it's going to cause like a total upending and it's not going to be possible to run a 3-color mana base like this anymore. Also, we have to think about the other decks that are going to be in the format, right? If the best deck becomes Eldrazi, Energy is not going to be able to compete. An Eldrazi deck would, creature-based like Eldrazi deck would absolutely smother Energy. I know I had to specify creature-based because, there's combo Eldrazi, like Shift and Tell that we've seen in the past, and you can also build like really prison-oriented Energy. But no, if there's an Eldrazi deck that's just slamming down Eldrazi's that have things like cast triggers and built-in 2-for-1s and high mana values being cast ahead of curve, it's going to smother an Energy deck. Absolutely. So we'll have to see what the meta looks like. But if the meta looks similar to what it looks like now, where the card Thoughtseize and the card Swords to Plowshares really win games, then Energy is going to continue to be good because this is just the most efficient way to back up this really effective black-white interaction. Revenue growth. Gemstone Caverns, right? It's another land in addition to the big 3. It's going to shake up the format a lot. This is a land that will put you ahead on mana if you are going second, which is not common. Well, not common in Magic. It's hard to actually recoup the advantages of going second in a really powerful way, and Gemstone Caverns is one of those cards. Now, this is a known quantity in formats like Modern. It has seen occasional play there. It has never really broken the format, so don't get your expectations too high, but it has seen legitimate play, like in Modern when Violent Outburst decks were really, really good and that card got banned. People were playing Gemstone Caverns to try and get ahead. And in Timeless, right now, we have this deck that a lot of people call the Slot Machine. Some people call it Riley Tempo. Some people call it the Frank Dooley deck, whatever you want to call it. Where the whole point of the deck is just like cast a Show and Tell to put an Atraxa into play, or Sorin Alenda, and just hope your opponent can't beat it, right? You're just being degenerate. It's degenerate to the point where a good turn 1 for this deck is literally Swamp, Dark Ritual, Thoughtseize yourself, put the Atraxa in your graveyard, and then reanimate it. You'll have a black mana floating so that you can hit another Thoughtseize off Atraxa and then discard to your opponent. It's some toxic stuff, right? And you're demanding your opponent has an answer. Of course, it folds like a house of cards to any sort of interaction. That line just falls apart to a surgical, falls apart to a counterspell if your opponent was able to hold up a counterspell. But Gemstone Caverns is going to let you get under your opponent's interaction and actually get ahead of their counterspells. Going, for example, Gemstone Caverns on your opponent's turn into Ancient Tomb on turn 1 will let you beat the counter magic before they can actually hold up mana drain, which is awesome. And this screenshot that I put in, right there below me, is the exact list I 7-0'd this metagame challenge with. This deck can 7-0 a metagame challenge. It's not the best deck in the meta, because if you bring it to a tournament, people know how to sideboard against it. People can contain it pretty well in a tournament setting, but just for ladder, like, it's really strong. So, like, if you don't know what to play day 1 of this BS format, take the list that's below me, swap out the mana base, take out the frogs. It's just a bit much casting frog in an Ancient Tomb deck. Take out the frogs, take out some of the mana, and just do Ancient Tomb, Gemstone Caverns. See how it goes. All right, there's a couple more lands that are marginal for Timeless that I'll mention. Inkmoth Nexus, so you can technically try to play an Infect deck right now. I'm just going to point it out. I don't think it's going to make a good deck in the format, but it's here. Petrified Field is interesting because we are in a Strip Mine format. Don't think we're going to play it with the express purpose of recurring Strip Mine, but it is definitely possible. And then lastly, we got the whole cycle of manlands, including Celestial Colonnade. I'm going to put that one up there because I know, we all know who's going to do it. The Blue Mages, they're going to play with no win conditions other than Celestial Colonnade. Oh my god, it's going to be terrible. At least it kills you in 5 turns, right, guys? All right. Special guests. We got some banger special guests, dude. We got Green Suns. I was not expecting this card. Green Suns is a really awesome card for the format. Green has for a long time been the worst card in the or the worst color in the format by a mile. So getting a really powerful, cheap spell to fetch your cheap green creatures, often combo pieces, out of your deck is really, really good. So I'm gonna point out some of my initial thoughts on something you use it for. If you want to try to build a lands deck or just really abuse Strip Mine, you can get an Elvish Reclaimer with this for 2 mana. Samwise, which I know my camera's partially covering, is a Lurrus compatible creature combo. I think that deck is like ready to break through if somebody can just figure out that last piece that makes it click. And perhaps the Green Sun Zenith tutoring up Samwise could be it. Unfortunately, Green Suns can't find like the other combo pieces in the deck, unless like there's a green sack outlet card that I'm unaware of. And then Cauldron Familiar, of course, is also not green, so whatever, but it helps. Venerated Rot Beast, I think this was a shout by Nimble Mongoose if you want to try to do some nonsense with that in Blink Moth Nexus, or Ink Moth Nexus, and do some Infect Toxic Gaming. Be my guest. Raminap Excavator is another good one to get with it, especially in a Strip Mine format. And at Alchemy card alert, Alchemy card, bottom right, let's read it. Wary Zone Guard enters tap survival at the beginning of your second main phase. If it's tapped, return up to 1 target land card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Perpetually gets 1/1/1/1. So this function is very similar to Raminap Excavator, except you don't actually need to consume your land drop in order to recur a land. It's already okay with fetch lands. The thing is, it's just a 3 mana green creature in a Lurrus format where green is the worst color, so nobody's playing it. But if we have Strip Mine and Green Sun Zenith, then yeah, you could put that guy in your deck and it could maybe do something. I'm not promising it's going to be good, but if this card is going to crack playability, this is how it's going to happen. We got some other special guests that I don't think will be as impactful. Maggus of the Moon is a redundant 5th through 8th copy of Blood Moon. If you want to build Red Prison, like how we were talking about Eldrazi Prison before, you can do Red Prison instead. And we were talking about mono white, you can do mono red instead. Just apply those same concepts to the red prison decks that people have already tried to brew. Maggus of the Moon is your extra copies of Blood Moon, so you can go all in on trying to get a turn 1 Chalice or Moon with the fast mana. In my opinion, Maggus is not going to be generically good in the format. Compared to other formats where Maggus sometimes excels, like Legacy and Vintage removal is very plentiful in this format. Energy has been a top deck for a straight year, so pretty much every deck has ways to answer a turn 1 Guide of Souls or the Energy Threat Suite. So there's a bunch of ways to kill Maggus of the Moon. Maggus of the Moon, just to like explain to people who haven't played other formats with it, it is sometimes better as a meta call when people aren't running as much creature removal. Like you're playing against a green combo deck that's going to lean on Force of Vigor to blow up your Blood Moon. You play Maggus of the Moon, they're not going to have a removal spell, they're going to get juked. I just don't think that situation is going to come up as much in Timeless because it's really common to run creature removal, and also cards like Abrupt Decay exist and are very commonly played in combo lists that answer, both Blood Moon and Maggus of the Moon. Like the current show and tell construction is to play a bunch of Abrupt Decay. So like I don't think Maggus really has any stock in the format right now, unfortunately. Nexus Darkness, that's a cool art, I gotta say that. And I just want to mention, like, Mono Black Midrange has been a deck in the past. It's been possible to play like a Shieldred, One Ring, Mono Black deck, and maybe Ancient Tomb could bring that deck back. So this is theoretically a card a deck could want. I'm not telling you it's going to be at all playable, but like this is theoretically a new card in the format that you could use. And we got a cool new Deafening Silence art. It looks awesome. That's the next most relevant thing on the list. We got some cool new arts. We got a new Warping Wheel art. We got a cool Nexus art. Nexus of Fate, that is. Wait, main set. There are a very small number of cards in the main set that are worth covering. Also, spoilers aren't done. I thought they were done today. They're done in 2 days. It's the bonus sheet that was done today. I was wrong. So, unfortunately, we have the leak picture of Lightstall Inquisitor, which is a card I'll talk about first. I think this guy is really, 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 really pushed for like a 1-drop. I don't know if it quite makes the cut in Timeless, but I just want to say like I appreciate this as like an aggro glue sniffer energy player. This is a Savannah alliance with 3 pieces of upside. The first is having Vigilance. The second is that 1 mana tax, and the third is the small amount of information you get. Because when the card gets exiled, you actually get told what the card is. So game 1 against a random opponent on ladder, you can deduce what their deck is pretty well from their land drop plus whatever card they exile. So like, for example, if you're playing Mardu Energy, not saying that this is necessarily going to be playable in Energy because the bar is really high, but if you're playing a deck like Mardu Energy, you play this on turn 1, you get a little peek at part of your opponent's hand, you deduce what they have. you then get to inform the decision of whether you're playing a Juggernaut Peddler or you're playing a Johnny on turn 2, because you'll know whether or not peddling them on turn 2 will be mission critical for winning the game. It's just something I want to point out. Like, it's 1 mana in, 1 mana tax out. It's a cool card. We have Hard Light Containment on the left. It is a card a lot of people have identified as strong. I do not think it's going to make the cut in current Timeless. Future Timeless. I'm struggling to see how it really makes the cut, because it does lead to you just being 2 for 1. Like, if we end up in a meta where like there's a deck that has enough artifacts to run this, then people are surely going to be running Force of Vigor, surely going to be running Abrupt Decay. Sure, having Ward 1 helps, but against cards like Abrupt Decay, it actually does not help at all. So I don't think it makes the cut, but it is a like push Chain to the Rocks variant, which is pretty cool. And then lastly, we have Starfield Shepherd, which I think is a really good shout in a Birthing Ritual format. Birthing Ritual decks have been pretty much the only green decks that have been playable for the last 6 months, and they haven't even been strong. The deck has really fallen off. But what you could do is, if you have a Birthing Ritual in play, you can warp this into play, search for like, a Guide of Souls, one of your really good creature cards, and then at end of turn, you stack the triggers so that the Birthing Ritual trigger goes first, and then the warp trigger goes second. So you can actually sacrifice this to Birthing Ritual and get something as big as a 6-drop out of your deck. Realistically, in Timeless, it'll get like a Balemurk or a Solitude or a Grief out of your deck, which is honestly really strong. It's a sweet deal for just 2 mana. I think this definitely could be playable in Birthing Ritual decks. We got a new Goyf. This card would strike me as actually quite playable in the current like Sultai Frog builds, or Sultai Esper Frog. I know it doesn't quite fit into Esper, but Psychic Frog decks love to like be blue-black plus splashing 1 or 2 colors at a time. Again, go back to my rant at the beginning of the video about like how it's too free to do a 3rd color and sometimes even a 4th in this format. So in the current format, this is a pretty nice beat stick if you're playing like Treasure Cruise in your deck, right? Play a couple copies of this. I don't know whether or not like Psychic Frog decks actually want just like a sorcery speed beat stick, but this is theoretically a really big one. It's also technically playable as like a sideboard juke. Like if you're playing Spy and you're expecting your opponent to bring out the Leyline of the Void, so then you can bring this guy in, try to sideboard juke. I don't know if I'm the biggest believer in it, but this is definitely a cool card in the card pool that we can think about in the future. All right, a couple more miscellaneous ones. Consult the Star Charts is just a cool impulse variant that could be playable in the various blue decks in the format. Extinguisher Battleship I actually think is really sweet. This is a card that you can play in like your Ugin's Lab decks. Like currently there's Shift and Tell, which wants 7 drops to exile to Ugin's Labyrinth, which this does. And it has a really relevant piece of text. When it enters, it blows up a permanent and deals 4 damage to each creature. So against Show and Tell specifically, if they cast the card Show and Tell, they put Omniscience to play, you put this into play, it blows up the Omniscience. Obviously, they can just win an instance beat, blah, 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 but at least gives you an angle to fight against them. And it's also relevant against energy. So if you're playing like a sneak attack deck, like the Gruul version of that deck that plays both Ugin's Labyrinth and sneak attack, sneaking this in against energy will blow up their board, which is really sweet, and also destroy a permanent. So sneak this in against energy, blow up their sideboard card, kill all of their creatures. It's pretty awesome. And then on the right, I put the 5 mythic planets that were very hyped, and they do theoretically have really powerful effects. Like, yeah, blue, add blue for every artifact you control. That's busted. Add green for each creature you control. Now you're talking, but it costs station 12 to activate. And I'll remind you all that station is a sorcery speed ability. And they enter tapped. WotC missed on the power level, unfortunately, with these guys. All right, let's do a new segment here. Let's call this Who Won, Who Lost. My camera is covering the lost text. Idiot here. We're going to talk about like what decks are probably going to go up in the meta and what is probably going to go down as a result of all of the cards that we said. Obviously, these are things that we have covered a lot. Of positives we definitely covered so far, but the negatives I also want to highlight. So who won? If you're a red prison Chad, rise up, you won. White guy, mono white gamer who likes sticking Thorn of Amethyst, you won. Frank Thuley, you won. Play your slot machine deck. Eldrazi believers, you bet you won. And if you're a Sorin degenerate who wants to cast Sorin Alenda a turn early, you won. If you're Rao's boyfriend, you won. Do you guys remember Tomek from the Ravnica Lord? Do you remember him? He's Rao's boyfriend. But let's read this card. It's a 2 mana, 2/3 flying. This was a shout by Top Deck Karn on Discord. Great shout. 2/3 flying for 2 mana. Lands on the battlefield and land cards in graveyards can be the targets of spells or abilities your opponents control. What does that mean in English? It means your opponent cannot strip mine you. Your opponents can't play land cards from graveyards. Oh, would you look at that? They can't recur the strip mine either, even if they wanted to. It's pretty cool. He is not symmetrical. He says opponents on it in each line. So you could strip mine your opponents while they can't strip mine you, which is really cool. He is double white, so it would be a little hard to play in a strip mine deck. But if you're playing like that mono white Chad deck that has like Chromox and a couple of other ways to help get the white card count, you could try to do it. And at worst, you just pitch him to your Chromox. All right, who lost? This is the interesting segment where I'm going to try to predict what's going to go down as a result of all of these meta changes. I think Belcher decks have been quite good, like Black-White Belcher and Green-Black Belcher in the top row have been tier 2 decks right below Energy and Show and Tell for a while now. And also Spy below that has been able to win tournaments. I think these decks are going to go down in stock a lot because they don't get to leverage Ancient Tomb, and a lot of the other combo decks they were competing with for the title of best combo decks are going to. And their mana base gets put under an exorbitant amount of pressure by all of the land attack. Just because Strip Mine is in the format, people are going to be more incentivized to play other land hate alongside it to amplify its effect. So you're going to see just more Ghost Quarters, more White Orchid Phantoms. You're just going to see more of the other stuff that can blow up an MDFC, and they have no basic to search up off of the more fair effects like White Orchid Phantom. So I think all these decks are really going to go down in the meta, unfortunately, due to that combined inability to run Ancient Tomb and all the land hate that we're going to see in the format. Land hate's going to be kind of mandatory in an Ancient Tomb format, unfortunately. I'm also really curious to see, like, is Strip Mine going to be a 4 of in every deck? Maybe. I don't know. I think it might be. I think it's going to get close to being a 4 of in every deck, and they're just going to, like, eventually restrict it, just citing, look, guys, it's in 85% of decks, it's got to go. And I would agree with it once it got to that point, but hey, I'm appreciating the fact that Wizards is letting us have fun with the card before they pre-restrict it. Like that, I think it's a good move to just let us have it for a couple of weeks. All right, Blue Cope. Cope, in general, just refers to like reactive blue decks, Psychic Frog Gaming, Banner Drain Gaming. Look at me, I'm gonna fetch my Mystic Sanctuary and put Treasure Cruise back on top of my library. I'm so clever. Unfortunately, those decks do rely on the current state of mana in Timeless a lot, and their mana being under attack is going to be bad. The inability to run Ancient Tomb is going to be bad for them. Other decks are just going to be faster with Ancient Tomb, which means it's going to be harder to play reactive. So at first, blue decks are definitely really going to fall off, but I have faith that like somebody's going to figure out an okay reactive deck. We'll just have to see what it looks like. I can tell you what it looks like right now. And unfortunately, at the bottom, the other like huge losers are 2 decks that I really love. It's the slow shifting woodland decks in the format. So these slow shifting woodland decks have been playable in the format for a while now, and they sort of exist in this really cool place in the meta where they sort of auto lose to degenerate combo, but they have this resiliency against blue decks that's really good because they can win without casting a spell, and they're also great against energy because they either play the One Ring, or they play Fury, or they play Null Drifter, bounce your board with Ugin's Binding, and they end up like and with a net positive matchup spread despite being really slow decks who can't interact with fast combo. And those decks are super fun. I love jamming both of them. But unfortunately, in this new meta, I think they're really going to fall off. First of all, the obvious thing is that their mana is going to be under attack in the same way that Belcher mana is going to be. Even though they get to run Ancient Tomb, I don't think it's going to be enough to help them out. And the second thing is that that niche that they really thrive in, the idea that they're good against energy and good against blue decks at the same time, is not going to matter anymore because I'm telling you, blue's going to fall out of the meta. It might come back, but it's going to fall out of the meta at first at least. And energy is probably going down. Energy is probably going to lose. I didn't put it in the who lost column because like, so it's a really BS deck, man. It's still probably going to be an okay deck to play at the very worst. And we'll have to see how good Strip Mine Energy is. But unfortunately, some of my favorite decks being these Shifting Woodland decks really lost. And if you were the gamer who was excited about getting to put Ancient Tomb in those decks, sorry, buddy. We'll see. I love the decks, though, by the way. So I'm 100% willing to be convinced that I was wrong, and I would be very happy if I was wrong, in fact. All right, we're at roughly half an hour. We can appreciate the extra slides here in this business template. They put so many, like I couldn't fill them with cards. That's it. Thank you for coming.